It's Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, and welcome to our feature interview for July 2018. I'm very excited to have Frank Russell. You are the first electric bass player to be on the cover of Chicago Jazz Magazine. What do you think about that?
So proud, so honored. I don't know if Neil Tesser wants me to say this, but he calls me the Rosa Parks of electric bass.
Yeah, you know why? Because you you know why. Our viewers are about to know why as well, because you get a sound out of the electric bass like no other. You're able to play all the different styles, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. We've been talking about doing something for a long time. You're on a podcast a couple years ago.
Yeah.
You got an exciting show coming up at WDCB Summer Music Series at the MAC, August 2nd, 7:30 p.m. Frank Russell and the Chicago Power All-Star Band at the Lakeside Pavilion. I got to make sure I get all the plugs in, but this is going to be an exciting thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on, but I wanted to talk first off. You play electric bass exclusively. I'm sure if you push came to shove, you could probably figure out the upright bass, but it's been many years.
I can play a little bit upright, but I'm concentrating on it.
But the bass playing that you do, you're able to cross over all the styles. And I think that you're one of the only bass players that are able to cross over all the styles fluidly and keep that texture, keep that sound, and go with whichever one you have to go with. So how did you first start playing bass?
Well, my dad actually played the upright bass in high school, and he always said when he met my mom and they got married, he would play the bass to her belly. So naturally, I came, and I guess I tried to carry on the tradition. I always tease and say, I wish you'd have put a stethoscope up there. I'd have been a doctor. And made more money. But no, I'm actually, I played, I think my first instrument was a guitar. I saw the Beatles. I know I'm the only guy to tell that story. and it captivated me, and I asked my dad to give me a guitar at 7. I'm giving my age away, but I don't care. So he got me a guitar, and the rest is history. I started playing drums, guitar, and at the age of 14, I began to play electric bass. A girlfriend of mine in high school needed a bass player. Their bass player had quit, and she knew I played guitar, so she just said, "You can play bass, right?" And I said, "Sure." So the fortunate thing, I just was with my dad on Father's Day. He got me whatever instrument I ever wanted, and I thank him to this day. And I got a Mustang Fender bass, and I guess the rest is history, and I'm here with you.
Well, so you had music all around you in the house. I mean, what kind of music were they playing? And you heard the Beatles, but I mean, were your
dad was
into jazz?
Yeah, big Miles Davis, Coltrane fan. And I remember seeing as a little boy albums up on the wall of Kind of Blue. I didn't know what they were. He had Art Blakey's album up there with these different African masks. It used to scare me, but I was surrounded by music all my life. And my mother actually sang around the house Shirley Bassey type tunes, and she would just say, Goldfinger, and Johnny Mathis, and then my aunt downstairs, she lived downstairs. They had a first jukebox in the neighborhood, all Motown stuff. So I was really into music, I think, most of my life.
Where'd you grow up? In Chicago?
I grew up in Chicago till we left Chicago at about 6 or 7 years old, and we moved to Hammond, Indiana. And we lived there for a few years. Then we moved to Gary, Indiana. And I kind of grew up in my teenage years in Gary, where I started playing bass guitar. And we had all the kids over in the neighborhood. Our house was the house that all the instruments were at, so all the kids were there. And it's so funny because Sunday for Father's Day, my brother had a band that my father was the manager of, and all the kids from 30 years ago put a CD together or DVD together of my father and how much he influenced their lives. And many went on to become great. 2 bass players out of that group And I always tell them they owe me checks because they gave me great careers. My brother plays in Minneapolis with a rock band called Strange Days. And they opened up for Steven Tyler and Peter Frampton and stuff. And another bass player in Atlanta, he plays a lot of gigs with all the hip-hop artists and stuff. So they gave my dad a tribute. And I'm here to give you a tribute too, Daddy. Thanks a lot. I'm here with Mike Jeffers, the first bass player on the cover.
Well, that's beautiful.
Electric.
So did they have a lot of music in the schools, or were you just learning this on your own?
They had music in school. I went to public school for a little while at Tolliston. We had a teacher named Mr. Horn, and I actually played saxophone in school, and started off in a beginner's band and worked my way up to
like
the
5th grade, 6th grade.
Yeah, worked my way up to the intermediate band very quickly. And so I would play sax in school. I still know the notes. E, A, D, G, C. And come home and listen to Herbie Hancock and Earth, Wind, and Fire. The first, I think one of the first tunes I had to learn on bass was Earth, Wind, and Fire tune. And I was able to tell that story to Verdine White once and Freddie White and Larry Dunn, the keyboard player. And I played with Ramsey Lewis. I got to play Sun Goddess with Ramsey. So it's all full circle.
Yeah, and it came around. I mean, because at that time, the electric bass, right? I mean, was there like a jazz band or anything happening? I mean, so you pretty much picked all this stuff up on your own, I would imagine.
Yeah,
right?
I was pretty much self-taught, although my dad, I did have guitar lessons at 8 and 9 years old. A friend of mine, Dwayne McClendon, we used to take lessons together. And so I did get a little formal training, and we had to learn how to play London Bridge is Falling Down and stuff like that. I remember to this day because Batman and Robin used to be on, and I couldn't watch it because I had to practice in the back. And the time Kato and Green Hornet were fighting Batman and Robin, I was learning London Bridge is Falling Down, and I could hear my brothers up in the front screaming from the fight. So that's the only demerit on my dad.
So you're not bitter.
I'm not bitter at all. I don't remember that.
So you're picking all this up and you're developing your ear. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
And moving on through high school, you're playing with different bands, or how did that kind of start?
High
happening?
school. There's a picture of me with the band that my girlfriend was in. She went on to become a soap opera writer, and she won many Emmys. Thank you, Charlotte Gibson, for asking me to play bass guitar.
I'm finding it fascinating because it sounds like you played saxophone, you picked up a bass because you were trying to impress a girl, and you started playing bass and you got into bass, and you're learning all this on your own. Yeah. Nobody's showing you any of this stuff. It's all just self-taught. You're sitting in the room listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire, plucking it out. I mean, how did you even know the notes that you're playing?
I just heard it, man. Like I said, I believe because my dad played, I always think that even me playing jazz music, I always loved upright bass players. That's why it's funny you said I go through all the different genres of music and because I love upright bass players as much as I love electric guys. I mean, I listen to all the Ron Carter stuff, Buster Williams, Stanley Clarke, Miroslav Vitas, Eddie Gomez. I actually met Ray Brown, and I emulated. I tried to get that sound in the bass, and one of my great stories I always tell is I did a record with Henry Johnson, the great guitarist from Chicago, and Freddie Hubbard was going to be on the session, and he took the tapes to Freddie in New York and put it on. Freddie put the headphones on, and he said, "Who's that on upright?" And Henry said, "That's not upright. That's electric bass." And Freddie got indignant. "I know upright when I hear it. That's upright." And Henry said what they did was had to isolate the track so it's just bass on there so he could hear the bass, and there was he heard the fret noise, and he said, "That is an electric bass." So I fooled Freddie Hubbard.
Well, there's your quote right there.
Yeah,
I know an upright bass when I hear an upright bass. Freddie Hubbard talking about Frank Russell playing electric.
God bless Freddie. I met him a few times. Henry used to play with him, and one of the great trumpet players of all time. I actually met him at Holiday Star. He was playing. I think Henry might have been working with him, and I went backstage, and he was playing piano. He was playing Benny and the Jets.
Really?
Dun, 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 dun. And it was surreal to me that one of the greatest trumpet players. That's how music encompasses. Even the greatest jazz musicians love rock, and rock and roll love jazz. So it's all just music, man.
Well, you know, I think that, do you think, because you didn't have like specifically formal training on the electric bass, that because of that, you were trying to get a sound?
Yeah.
You weren't worried about somebody saying, no, man, you know, you got to pluck this, pluck that, whatever.
Right.
You were trying to get a sound. So you're listening to all these upright bass players. You're not worried about it. You're just trying to emulate what that sound is. I think is that kind of where it came from?
That might be the key. And of course, I listened to all the electric bass players. I was a big Larry Graham guy. You know, you had to learn that if you wanted to slap. James Jamerson. It seems like I was gravitated towards bass even before I played it. I just heard those lines all the time. And using those bass lines, the electric bass players and the upright players, and meshing those two together. And I think I kind of got my sound, because I wanted to play Jocko's stuff. I wanted to play Larry Graham stuff, Bernine White, and I wanted to play like Ron Carter. If you hear me on fretless, I slide those notes. I've learned how to play those notes to make it sound like an upright. And I believe that's my that's the way I approach playing bass guitar now. Whatever the music calls for, that's what I'm going to try.
I always feel like that when I'm talking to different musicians, and I feel the same way. Whereas if I wouldn't have taken lessons, you know, sure, I would have learned all the technique and stuff, but I might have been thinking completely differently, just trying to emulate a sound and get a sound rather than hearing somebody say, oh, you're doing it wrong, your technique's wrong, whatever.
Right.
Sounds to me like that was like part of the key to your foundation, is that you weren't worried. You were like trying to emulate this funk player or this upright player or anything like that. And that's how everything came together. And it's interesting to me because, you know, you formulated this whole thing. This is your sound. But you didn't. I think that when you go and you take lessons, and depending on the personality, obviously, but when you go to take lessons and somebody tells you, "Oh man, you know, don't do your technique that way," well, that changed. At least for me, that changed the whole way I would think about it. So then I would be like, "Well, okay, I can't do that because you know my technique's wrong, so I'm not going to try to get that sound because I'm playing jazz and not rock or funk or whatever it is." So I think it's interesting that you kind of melded this whole thing together from your ears.
There was no limitations. I heard that the great pianist, I can't think his name, Tatum.
Art Tatum?
Art Tatum. He used to hear those the rolls that played the pianos.
Yep.
And it was actually two piano players. But he didn't know that. So he learned how to play with four hands. And that's the beauty of music, that you can everybody can find their own way, and I think I found mine I was obsessed with music like most of us musicians, and even to the point that my dad was like, why don't you go out and play with the boys on the streets sometimes? I'd be sitting in the without an amplifier sometimes with the bass up against the door so I can hear the vibrations and listen. I'm learning Herbie Hancock and Paul Jackson and so, and I got to tell, I saw Stevie Wonder. I met him a couple of months ago, and his music just amazed me so much. And I got to tell him that his mini Moog bass playing was just as influential on me as Stanley Clark's or Jocko's or James Jamerson. And he told me he heard it in my playing. And I told you after Stevie Wonder told me he dug my playing. I said I could have left the earth right after that, but I'm still here.
When did you start really seriously starting to play out? Who were you playing with?
I started really well. My first professional gig was with that band with the singer. It was the Everyday People. I think I was 14 and 15. We actually played for the mayor. The first black mayor.
Starting to play gigs.
We were playing gigs, man, and my father was the co-manager of with Mrs. Gibson, Charlotte's mother. She was a school librarian, and she took me to my first classical concert too with Andre Watts. So thank you for that, Mrs. Gibson. She's gone on to glory now. So we always thank her for that. And I was a little, I wanted to hear some funk, so I was a little bored. I didn't really realize what the brilliance and beauty of it, but I pretended like I was. We started working with that band a lot, and I was in high school, but we would work almost every weekend.
So you're 14, you're playing gigs.
15,
15
yeah. for Society in Indiana.
Mm-hmm. So like quote unquote jobbing gigs, is that?
Clubs,
even playing
no,
privates?
we were playing private gigs and stuff,
Okay.
and functions and openings and ribbon cuttings
Yeah.
and stuff. So we started working a lot, and I think I got my work ethic from that. Plus, I was such a professional at a young age. I saw my mom and dad. My mom was so professional. She was the first black woman to get the executive key at the Continental Bank in the 70s, I think.
Wow.
And so my work ethic is ridiculous. I tell everybody I worked with Ken Chaney for 30 years. I was late for one gig, and I'll never forget the pain of that one gig that I was late for. So it taught me to get a great work ethic. And then from high school, I got in a fusion band in Indiana called Innovations, my name. My mother says it's her name, but so I'll give it to you, Mom. So, and these guys were great players. This guitar player is Larry Campbell. He was learning all the Pat Metheny stuff and John McLaughlin and Spiral Gyro. We were into fusion. And that's when I went on from the funk and started playing that type of music.
Start melding jazz and funk together at that point because of the fusion stuff.
Then I saw Stanley Clarke in Return to Forever on soundstage, and it blew me away.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember those concerts. I got to tell Lenny White that too, what a big influence he was. I said, "What's it like playing with Stanley Clarke and Jaco Pastorius and Ron Carter?"
Yeah, right.
So I actually gave Lenny my last album, and the next time I saw him, he told me he enjoyed it. So that was a big deal. So that's why this new project is so it's full circle. Henry Johnson said he remembers me playing in high school, and he hears the growth from high school all the way up to now.
Well, you knew Henry back in high school?
I knew Henry.
Yeah.
I met him in high school.
You guys have known each other for a long time.
Yeah, since we were 15 years old. And I remember him he was in the West Montgomery already. I was learning Verdine White and Larry Graham.
Yeah.
And he was already on to his way to being one of the top jazz
And just to bring it up
guitarists.
for people that don't know, Henry Johnson, world-class guitar player, played with Joe Williams for a long time, Nancy Wilson, everybody
Freddie
else.
Hubbard,
Freddie Hubbard, and then toured with Ramsey for a long time
Still
as
touring
well.
with Ramsey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's who Henry Johnson
I was on. I've been on 6 of Henry's CDs, and I always tell him I'm always trying to catch Henry's records, because like I saw Denzel Washington when he won the Oscar, and Sidney Poitier was up in the audience, and he said, "Sidney, I've always been chasing you. I'm always chasing you, and I'm always chasing Henry." Henry's, I give him a lot of credit for me being a solo artist. He's the one that suggested I do that.
Okay.
Many years ago, I got a regular gig for a year at Pops for Champagne, and people they loved the trio. It was myself, Henry Johnson, and Greg Rockingham. I know you know Greg.
Yep.
And people kept asking for CDs, and we didn't have anything. I said, Henry, let's just put together a CD of tunes we know and stuff, and we did it, and it took off.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are, three CDs later. So thank you, Henry Johnson. There's a lot of thanking going on.
Yeah, no kidding, huh? No kidding. Well, so now let's talk a little bit. How did you get that? I mean, you're playing all around town, doing a lot of stuff. How did you get into the Ladysmith group?
Oh, wow.
I mean, that is like something that really changed your entire career, isn't it? Because you toured all over the world with them.
Yeah, that was big. It's funny, I was sitting in the basement with my mother's sister, Aunt Julia, once, and we were watching Ladysmith Black Mambazo doing the Graceland tour with Paul Simon.
Yep.
And I was mesmerized. And I remember her being like kind of in tears, because she said the vocals reminded her of growing up down south, and those that a cappella sound and the church sound, and I had no idea that 10, 15 years later I would be touring with these guys. It happened because I did a play at the Steppenwolf Theater.
So you're in Chicago, you're playing professionally, playing gigs and all that stuff, and then you, like every musician, you're taking a gig here, a gig there, everything you can do, and you got into the theater scene a little bit on the side from everything else, right?
Yeah, James Kamak, the great bass player with Ahmad Jamal, he was playing with Nancy Wilson, and they asked him to do a play at the Steppenwolf, and he couldn't do it, so he asked, could I do it? And it turned into that play. It was called Evelyn and the Polka Kings with Eric Simonson. And he came to one of my gigs about 5 years later and said, I'm doing a play with Lady Smith Black Mambazo, and I need a bass player. Would you be interested? I'm like, let me think. Yes. So anyway, oh my God, that's one of the greatest gigs I've ever had.
Well, and did you think it was just going to be a short run here in Chicago?
Yeah, I did. And it actually turned into almost 6 years. In between, we did 3 months out of the year. We would travel to Boston, and we were at the Kennedy Center for 2 or 3 months, and in New Jersey, and it just took off, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And I always dedicate a tune, my last 2 CDs, to them, to those guys, and the influence. They don't just walk the walk; they talk the talk, and Joseph Shabalala is one of the greatest human beings I've ever met on the planet. And I always told him, I said, Joseph, you changed my life. And he was like, yes, brother, but you must come home. he always wanted us to go to South Africa and play but it was such a big production that we never could do it. But so I want to thank you, Joseph Shabalala, and all the guys, Lady Smith. They're like brothers to me. Yeah. They actually started calling me Frank Shabalala.
Oh, yeah?
And until they met my dad, this is how cool Joseph was. I was all excited. I said, Joseph, tell me what you call me to my dad. And he said, I call you Frank Russell. Because he wanted to show my dad, honor and respect.
Yeah.
Just man.
So you were on tour with them? I mean, so they do like 3 months on, 3 months off or something?
3 months, no, 3 months out of the year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
For 5-6 years.
Wow. Well, so, we're talking a lot. We're talking about you're coming up, you're playing gigs, you're doing everything. Now, you have a couple other CDs out, and you started writing original music during this time? I mean, were you kind of doing that throughout the entire time?
You know what? I've been writing since I was a teenager. My brothers and I got together and with my dad for Father's Day, and we were talking about songs. I was like the neighborhood Quincy. And everybody.
Well, you're practicing constantly. I imagine there's a lot of ideas coming out,
I'm showing everybody their parts. I'm showing my brother how to play the drum part. My other brother how to play Barry, and Derek how to play the bass parts. I'm playing lead. I'm making up songs. Some of the neighborhood kids came over. Some of the bad kids. This is how music soothes everyone, man. Some of the kids that were kind of troublemakers, they were coming to my house. And they would calm down and just want to learn this music, and I had a couple of parents actually thank me for kind of changing the trajectory of some of the kids. So this music is a powerful thing, and I always thank the Lord for the blessings He's given me and this life He's given me. And I always, when we go in the studio, we pray before the session and stuff. And that's why I found out one of the guys I knew for years he didn't believe in God. I won't mention your name, but that day he prayed, or he was out the session. No, I'm just kidding.
That's one way to do it.
Everybody held hands and stuff, but it's been a great life, man.
And you're writing original music during that time. So when you're coming up, because I can remember when you first started putting out CDs, you were putting out, there was original tunes on there, I think, along with some covers probably and everything else. But, I mean, for you playing for so long, you must have been writing a lot of material over the years and just maybe playing them on gigs?
Yeah, not even so much that. I from the years that I started playing with other bands and stuff, I stopped writing a lot. But when it was time for me to do my own project, I just got into it. And it was like music has been in my molecules since I was 7.
Yeah.
And then with the event of looping bass lines, you can loop the lines, and I wrote all my tunes with just looping the bass line, looping the chord, looping the melody, and I just come to me from. I always say they come from upstairs, and Henry Johnson actually told me, and a couple of people, they said even with these great covers on the CD. They love my music just as much as some of these like Actual Proof and Bright Side's Life and stuff.
Yeah.
Because they say they feel it from my heart, even though the covers of these bass players I pay tribute to.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about this. So it's Frank Russell Influences, a tribute to bass guitar in jazz, and we will link it up down below. So what's the significance of this? Now, you're paying tribute to all of these different musicians, but a lot of them are on here too, I think, right?
Well, not this one. The last one, I actually did have Daryl Jones and Richard Patterson. I wrote a tune because I got the idea. I saw Stanley Clarke, Victor Wooten, and Marcus Miller do a tour together. Mm-hmm. And said,
you know Daryl Jones
yeah,
pretty
he's
well,
one of my
right?
dear friends. He actually wrote the liner notes for this CD, and I called him up. I said, Daryl, would you mind? Because I know he's a brilliant guy, and I said, what do you think about writing the liner notes for my record? And he'd never done it before. So he says, oh, okay. So, and he knocked it out of the park, man. Yeah. It's such a, you gotta, if you pick up this CD, you read Daryl Jones' liner notes, because to this day I can't believe how
How'd you end up meeting Daryl Jones? I mean, he's from Chicago, right?
Yeah, we were doing some of the same gigs when we were in our 20s, and he got the heck out. All of a sudden, we were, you know. I met him on a band called Windsong, a wonderful band with the late Terry Morset. Henry Johnson was in that band. Al Smith, Charles Matthews. I forgot who was singing. But anyway, he got sick one night. He doesn't remember this. And I was hanging out with Terry Morset. And he said, well, Frank Russell can play the bass. And he looked at me like, who's this guy, this Gary guy? And I did the gig, man. And the first tune was Spain, and I knew it.
Yeah.
So I was in. So next day, after that, Daryl got the gig with Miles Davis, and it was gone. He was gone. So one of the tunes that Daryl did with Miles is called Decoy. Mm-hmm. And by its being a tribute to electric bass players in jazz, Daryl's one of the great bass players of all time to me. And so I did a new version of that Robert Irving III actually wrote and did with Miles. I think it was one of Robert's biggest selling tunes. And I did that. I did Affirmations for Stanley Banks, who was George Benson's bass player for 40 years. Yep. We did Bright Side's Life for Jocko. One of the first times I heard him was with Pat Metheny. Who else?
So these are
Marcus Miller, yeah.
These are all the influential guys that are influenced you, and you tried to pick the tunes that influenced you.
Yeah, I wanted to give them. I wanted to pay homage to those guys. And it's funny because with the radio campaign I'm doing, and the last record, I'm on the charts with these guys. So I'm seeing my name with Marcus Miller, and once it was Esperanza Spalding, Eddie Gomez. A lot of bass. One time, the biggest thing was I was on the charts with Paul McCartney, Sir Cherub Paul. Oh. I know that's. Did
he call you up and say, "Hey, man, I see your name on there"?
No.
No, okay.
He didn't call me, but my mother called me. I think that's when she said, "Oh, this bass thing's working out," because I was on the charts. He had a jazz record out about 6 years ago, and I forgot the name of it. And it was doing well on the jazz charts, and my name was on some playlist with Paul McCartney's, man. And it's full circle because that's why I started playing
with the
guitar
Beatles.
with the Beatles. I didn't know he was playing bass. I didn't know the difference then.
Right.
But it just looked cool.
Yeah.
And I heard the girls screaming.
Well, so now you've got the new CD out, Frank Russell Influences, and we're going to link that up, but it's available at frankerussell.com.
Yeah.
And, of course, I'm sure it's available Amazon,
iTunes,
Apple Music, CD Baby, all the good stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you have this show coming up August 2nd, WDCB Summer Music Series at the Mac, Frank Russell and the Chicago Power All-Star Band. It is free. It is at the Lakeside Pavilion, right there at the College of DuPage. August 2nd, 7:30 p.m. Tell us about it. This sounds like a massive undertaking, if you ask me.
It is. It's it's a bit of it's a monumental thing that I came up with. I actually saw the great Dan Bendert from WDCB, and I told him about this project before it came out, and I said I would love to do a show where I pay tribute to these great musicians, and I could get some of the great musicians that were on this record, and so and they played so fabulously. Dee Alexander's singing her. She's singing so wonderfully on this. Henry Johnson's playing some of the greatest guitar solos I've ever heard, period.
Yeah.
I got Wallace Roney on there. Robert Irving did a couple of tunes. He did a new arrangement of Decoy that he wrote for Miles. Mm-hmm. And a tutu arrangement that he actually sent Marcus Miller's manager, and we waited to hear back about that. Who else? Tony Carpenter on percussion, Micaiah McCraven killing on the drums, Kahari Parker, who plays with George Benson. He's actually playing on the Affirmation, the tune that George made famous.
Yeah.
Charles Rick Heath, Greg Spiro. Greg did a lot of tunes, and Vijay Telesnayak, who's my partner in crime, he helped co-produce this record, and we recorded it at Transient Sound Studio with him and Steve Gillis, two of my dear friends. And I just asked Dan, could we put something together? And he called me for this.
Oh, that's great.
And it's a great honor, and WDCB is doing a lot to promote this, and you're helping out so much.
Well, that's what we're doing. But I mean, so this is happening August 2nd. So after you watch this interview, read a little bit about Frank. Now that you know about Frank, I'm sure you would love to meet everybody out there August 2nd at WDCB. But if you can't make it to the College of DuPage, everybody can check out your website, frankerussell.com, because I know we talked a little bit before we came on camera. You've got shows coming up at Pete Miller's early in July. I'm sure there'll be repeats on that. I know you do the Hyde Park Jazz Society every once in a while.
Yeah, I sure do. We used to, I did a lot of Hyde Park Jazz Society festivals. I think I did the first one, Ken Chaney.
Okay, yep.
And I played it with Henry Johnson. I played it with my band a couple of times. So yeah, that's just a great organization. I'm not doing it this year.
Yeah. Well, I also think that probably one of your most monumental gigs that you've ever done was at Joe's Bebop Cafe with Mike Jeffers on drums. Just throwing that out there.
That's right. That's
where we first met.
That's right, and we didn't get that on tape, and I'm upset about that.
Yeah, didn't we? It was with Skinny Williams.
It's Skinny.
And at the end of the set, we would all come off and we would play on the tables all the way out, because that was like the kind of the deal. Wasn't that like something like that? Or?
You did. You did that.
You just kept soloing.
Yeah, I kept playing.
You stayed up there.
I wasn't going to play on the tables.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in, Frank. This is awesome. I'm glad you're the feature interview for July 2018, Chicago Jazz Magazine. Of course, get all the information at chicagojazzmagazine.com if you're watching this on other platforms. And Frank, I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Mike. I want to thank you for having me as the first electric bassist on the cover of the magazine. It's a great honor, and I really appreciate that. I'm still knocking down walls, man. I was the first to, I think, do Chicago Jazz Festival, Hyde Park Jazz Festival, Elkhart Jazz Festival, and we're still breaking down walls with the electric bass. And that's why I'm so glad I got to pay homage to the electric bass in jazz.
That's
on
right.
this new CD.
Well, it's fascinating hearing about how you came up in music and how you formulated your sound, because it's unique to anything that I've heard and anything a lot of people have heard throughout the entire country. So we're going to look for you in the future to do more incredible things and great recordings. But for now, appreciate you watching the feature interview for Chicago Jazz Magazine. We will see you next time.